Right, so here are my here's my little breakdown, my little chats of the second chapter. Sorry, I just got some tea. Second chapter of the Lord of the Rings, the Shadow of the Past. I alluded to last breakdown a little bit about how it's one of my favorite chapters, and I think it's just because there's this element in storytelling that you get sometimes when you've got the protagonist or whatever character it is that kind of has an understanding of the world and is a kind of place in the story that is similar to the viewer. So we're kind of seeing it in their eyes and figuring it out as we go kind of with them. And at various points in the book, these are different characters, but in this chapter, it's very much like we're like Frodo. We're trying to figure it out, and here's Gandalf, a very, very intriguing, eccentric character, who just has a massive information dump. But you're just hanging on every word, and Tolkien has just managed to create it and just craft it so well that there is so much to unpack, and that's why I'm a little nervous about this little breakdown because I've got a lot to talk about. And I could talk about this chapter for hours and hours and hours. But firstly, before we actually talk about the chapter itself, I just want to talk about a few things that we're introduced to. So, as a character, Gandalf is much more prominent here than he was in the first chapter, and I want to talk a little bit about Gandalf first, who's always been. I hesitate to use the word favorite character, but he's always been closest to my heart whenever I've read Tolkien. I first read The Hobbit when I was in about grade 2, and he was instantly my favourite character. I remember I went to a garage sale, and I actually just got it on the shelf behind me, a little lead character of Gandalf holding a palantir and his staff. The staff's broken. But I was just enchanted by this character. And still to this day, he is absolutely... just that there's something in him that I just resonate so deeply with me, more than any other character. Although I do have lots of other favorite characters in the books, but Gandalf it's kind of a part of me in a way, I guess. So I'm just thinking about Gandalf right now, and obviously he's one of kind of the most famous in a pop culture sense characters of Lord of the Rings. Like you think about Lord of the Rings, you think about kind of Gandalf. He's there. Along with Gollum and a couple of others. But last breakdown we talked about root words and Tolkien being a philologist and names kind of suggesting the character rather than coming up with the character and then finding a name. Gandalf is exactly the same. So Tolkien stumbled across a piece of old, I don't know, I should have done my research first, but I've read it before. It's not coming to me very easily, but a piece of old literature, an old like a Anglo-Saxon, Norse, Northern European story about a dwarven troop, a group of dwarves traveling to a mountain, and the leader of these dwarves was named Gandalf. And this is a real thing, and all the other dwarven names were kind of consistent with each other, like they were actually like Biffa, Boffa, and Bomber. Yeah, you can see a lot of the Hobbit here. But then there was Gandalf there, and it kind of stood out as just like very different. And so he studied Gandalf, and I'm going to read a passage here from a David Day book. Gandalf comes from the Icelandic Drvigatal, Gandalfir. The Old Norse elements of Gandalfir were translated, when translated, are Gand, meaning a magical power, or the power of Gand, that is austral travelling. Alternative elements may be Gandhi, an object used by sorcerers, an enchanted staff, or enchanted crystal of a wizard. And Alf, the kind of suffix you get there, is elf or white. Therefore, the three best translations of Gandalf's name are Elf Sorcerer, White Staff, or White Sorcerer. So you've got this name that, is standing out. It's very, very different from all the other dwarven names. in the group, and Tolkien's like, this is interesting. And I just wanted to, so we've got the 3 translations of Gandalf. And we'll start with Elf Sorcerer. So the translation of Elf Sorcerer, or Elf Wizard, applies descriptively because Gandalf is the wizard who becomes most closely associated with the Grey Elves of Middle-earth. Although not an elf himself, Gandalf was a supernatural spirit from the realm of Aman, from the realm of the Light Elves. Thus, the name Gandalf seems to have suggested a plot that would eventually return the Elf Sorcerer to his elven home across the Western Sea. That's cool. Again, this is from the book. So the name itself almost suggests a plot. Again, and this is very much like what we were talking about. What Tolkien does is Tolkien finds the name first, and then the name suggests the story to him. Gandalf Whitestaff is another translation. When Gandalf first appears in The Hobbit, he is described as an old man with a staff. Staff is the primary symbol by which a wizard is known, for it's the ancient scepter of power in disguise. The staff is also the vehicle by which all wizards wield their power. The fact that the staff is white suggests a wizard who commands white or good sorcery rather than black or evil sorcery. Now, I'm not so sure about how it says here that the staff is also the vehicle by all wizards by which all wizards wield their power. Actually, no. That now that I'm saying that though, and this is getting really nerdy. Sorry. It does, I guess, seem that way. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, and this is a completely side topic from Tolkien, like Dungeons and Dragons has you can't hold it and compare it to Tolkien. But you got like this focus, a way that you can channel your power. I guess the staff can be a way to channel that in specific ways. But obviously, the impression that the reader shouldn't be getting here is that the staff itself is the power, and that Gandalf would be kind of like helpless without the staff. I think it's a little different from, like, say, a wand, like a Harry Potter wizard, like where you don't have your wand and then you're kind of just screwed. I think it's quite different to that. Although you do see at Orthanc later. Sorry for spoilers. Gandalf breaks the rod of Saruman and dispels him from the Order, and then Saruman's kind of just like done, and he only has the power of his voice. So I don't know. Sorry, that was a big rant. That's actually something I'd like to look more into, the significance of, I guess, magic objects, or magic. Tolkien doesn't really have a magic system, which is something that I would like to do an episode all about, just that. Not an episode, just a talk, a breakdown. That the magic system is very, very deliberately vague and undefined, because it's not really a magic system to begin with. But we'll talk about that at another point. The last translation of Gandalf, sorry, this is going on for a while, is White Sorcerer. The translation of White Sorcerer or White Wizard is probably the best and simplest translation of Gandalf. Initially disguised as Gandalf the Grey, a rather ragged old conjurer, throughout his many adventures he only uses white, that is good sorcery, and in the end his true nature is revealed when he is reincarnated as Gandalf the White. There's not too much to talk about on that one. That's fairly straightforward. So we've got some translations on the word Gandalf. And now we're going to Frodo just real quick. There's this idea that, Frodo is going to have to take up this burden. We see in this chapter, Gandalf and Frodo are talking. By the end of it, Gandalf's like, right, this sucks. I'm going to have to go away, though, and leave the Shire. But there's actually, again, this is more language and more names. Here we go. Sorry, I'm just going to read again. In the context of the One Ring, there is a startling linkage between the name Baggins and another specialized underworld occupation, bagger or thief. And this is what I want to talk about. So why Frodo? Why Bilbo? Why did Tolkien, use those characters? Well, the name Baggins itself, again, we're talking about words kind of allowing the plot to be derived. A Baggins itself, let's see. Remarkably, the bagger or thief, bagger thief, is a thief who specializes in stealing rings by seizing a victim's hand. So the word bagger is actually a term for thieves who steal rings, specifically rings, snatch them from people's fingers. it's got some French roots. It seems that the beginning of the Baggins name, that from the beginning, the Baggins name contained the seeds of the plot of both Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Frodo and Bilbo were born to be baggers or ring thieves. And that's a quote from the book. So I thought that was really profoundly interesting, because I'm like, well, we've been talking about, hobbits and the root words and Gandalf, but this is literally the entire kind of very skeleton structure of both books, like the plot, being derived from the name Baggins. That's sick. And then blah 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 blah. Why Frodo specifically? What's in a name? What were the special qualities that Frodo brought to the ring quest? Well, Froda, which is old English, means wise. Frothy meaning the wise one. Frodo the peacemaker. Frodo the wise. In Old English Scandinavian mythology, the name Frodo, or Froda, Frothy, or Frotha, is most often connected with a peacemaker. In the Old English epic of Beowulf, which I'm currently reading, highly recommend, there is Froda, the powerful king of the Heatherbards, who attempts to make peace between the Danes and the Bards. In Norse mythology, there's a King Frothy who rules a realm of peace and prosperity. Also in Icelandic texts, we find the expression Frotha Frith, meaning Frothy's peace, and making a reference to the legendary age of peace and wealth. So Frodo, as a name, also has implications, which we don't need to get into too much, because I am now realizing that this is going to be quite a long breakdown, because I haven't even gotten to the book itself yet. Those were just a couple of side points I thought about language origin. But anyway, so let's leave that behind. We can talk more about that later. Maybe we can do an entire thing about how the Lord of the Rings. Hang on, I'm gonna have some more tea. My throat's hurting. I'm speaking at 100 kilometers an hour. So chapter 2, Shadow of the Past. Already said it's kind of one of my favorite chapters. Bit of an info dump. So what are some points to talk about? Well, first, we talked last little breakdown on chapter 1 about the gaffer in the ivy bush, and his conversation, and there were various things that I pointed out. Well, now we've got and Gaffer was talking to the miller. Now we've got Sam, the gaffer's son, at the Green Dragon, which is another pub in Hobbiton, and he's talking to the miller's son. So we had the gaffer and the miller, and now we've got the gaffer's son and the miller's son, right? And they're talking about a lot of these rumors that have been circulating that are from the wild world, from travelers and whatnot, and you get a sense that to Sam, these are more than just rumors, and they're connected to all the stories that he heard from Bilbo, and those stories again were more than stories. They have a deep place in his heart, and there's a real sense that he feels like something's actually going on here. To which Ted is kind of like the he just ridicules it all. He doesn't really think much of it. And you kind of get a sense of the gaffer hated the miller, and now Sam and the miller's son again don't get along too well, or at least are very different in temperament. And here's the quote here: "I've heard tell that the elves are moving west. They do say they're going to the harbours, out away beyond the White Towers." So Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea, past the old towers beyond the western borders of the Shire. But it was an old tradition that away over there stood the grey havens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return. "They are sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They're going into the west and leaving us," said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly and solemnly. And this is really, really powerful, I think, not just in this passage, but just in all of Tolkien's works concerned with Middle-earth. There is this really strong theme about the diminishing and the slow fading of the elves from the world. At creation, creation and then the elves come after creation, indefinite amount of time between. We don't know exactly how long, because the measurement of time was very different. But once the elves are there, they're very, very powerful. They're much more proficient in warfare, in craftsmanship, and like Fëanor creates the Silmarils, and obviously they're creating the rings of power even in the Second Age, and slowly and slowly and slowly they start to diminish, and there's this real sorrow that you get from the sense that there are these immortal beings. They knew the world once when it was kind of perfect, like an Eden type thing, and they've seen all the sorrows, and they're leaving. And that's a really, really big theme throughout Tolkien's works, but especially in Lord of the Rings, is that evil either wins the day, and I've said this before. Evil either wins the day, not the day. It's just victorious, and the world is covered in darkness. So either evil is victorious, or evil is overthrown, but only for a short time. Evil will return, and good will be forever diminished. Those are the two choices that you have, and that will be totally fleshed out more as we read through Lord of the Rings. But you get a real sense that even if we win, even if evil is done away with for a time, the elves are leaving. Middle Earth is never going to be the same, and all that was once good and once loved is going to be a memory, and a beautiful memory, but in many ways a really sad, sorrowful memory. And I just get all of those emotions welling up in me when I hear Sam kind of chanting, "They're sailing, sailing, sailing over the sea. They're going into the west and leaving us." And Sam himself is very, very enchanted by the elves as well. I think Sam and I could have a pretty good conversation. Moving on, we're already at 16 minutes, almost 17 minutes, so this is going to be a long one, but that's just what it is. Right, last episode I talked a little bit about how that night with Bilbo, after he disappears from the party and he says some very concerning things, and Gandalf kind of dawns on Gandalf that this is a bit of a problem. I would like to remedy that a little bit. It's been a few months, and I'm not actually joking. It's been a few months since I've read The Lord of the Rings, and I did assume a few things. Firstly, that I kind of filled in a little of the gaps, and it wasn't a nuanced enough view of Gandalf's feelings on the ring, and he fleshes it out a lot more in this chapter. He first, he was very concerned, even all the way back in The Hobbit, when they're casting out the necromancer from Mirkwood, the White Council. But he goes through various things, and you've read the chapter, or you're going to read it, or what have you, so you can see how that's fleshed out. But essentially, he just decides to wait. So the words of Sauron allay his fears a little bit, but he's much more aware of it. And even from the start, which is what I said in the last breakdown, was completely incorrect. I said he doesn't really know whether it's a great ring or just like one of the little essays in the craft, like a lesser ring. Well, he says explicitly here, a great ring, as obviously it seemed to me. So he knows from the start that this ring is something profoundly powerful. It's a great ring, one of the 20. So it's either of the 3 elven rings, the 1 ring, one of the 7 of the dwarves, or one of the 9. It's obviously not one of the 9. We will learn more about that, how they become ring wraiths. But yeah, he's not sure, but it's obviously a great ring. So I got that wrong, right? So I wanted to bring that up. He says, and I waited. So after all of that, the words of Saruman for that time are enough for the whole White Council. And I waited until that night when he left his house. He did and said things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last something dark and deadly was at work, and I've spent most of the years since then finding out the truth of it. I think that is firstly, that is like a really powerful sentence. Just the way in which Tolkien says, said and did things then that filled me with a fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work. You get a real sense of gravity and weight, and something dawning on you. But also, I just want to say that I wasn't wrong in the last one, in the sense that, drawing the connection to what Elrond said, if it weren't for Gandalf, if it weren't for Gandalf's vigilance and watchfulness, and his relationship with the hobbits, everyone would have found out too late, and it would have all been over. So there's a sense that Gandalf really here is the mover at work behind this, and that is a trend that you'll see a lot more. In many ways, this is kind of Gandalf's kind of great task, and that is explicitly said, I think, by Elrond himself. This is Gandalf's great task. He came over from Valinor, from the Undying Lands, to Middle-earth at the end of the Second Age, and this is his great task. So, yes. Now I've got another one here, although I don't know. Yes, and then you can see in this quote here that it fleshes it out even more. The ring of power, the ring passed out of all knowledge and legend, even so much of its history is now only known to a few, and the council of the wise could discover no more. But I can at last carry on the story, I think. So I also said that it would be 9 years till he came back. I was kind of wrong. It says in this chapter that it was 3 years after the party that he didn't return, and then after that, for a short stint, he was coming fairly often, and then all of a sudden it was 9 years. So actually, between the party and now this chapter, so between the end of a long expected party and probably about midway through this chapter, that has been since Frodo was 33, coming of age to 50. So that's a long time. So a lot more time has passed than I previously alluded to. Again, that's because it's been a few months. I haven't read Lord of the Rings since before exams. So I was a little dull on that. Next point. Where is it? Sorry, I've just dog-eared the bit. Gollum. We get introduced to Gollum, and that is a big part of this chapter. And Gollum really, really is one of the most important characters in both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. That's no surprise to anyone, but you really get a sense in this chapter how so much of the fate of the world is tied up in Gollum. And obviously, eventually, it passes. The ring passes from Gollum and goes on to Bilbo. But even after that point, as Gandalf says, he still feels like there's something that Gollum's still got a part to play. He's had the ring for so long, about 500 years, under the Misty Mountains, and he's so connected to it. It's such a part of him that he's kind of now bound up in the fate of the ring. And obviously, I've already spoiled a couple of things. I'm assuming if you're reading this, you're interested enough in the books, probably because you've at least read them or watched the movie. But I won't spoil this, but Gollum does play a very, very big part in the fate of the ring, and the ring does play a very, very, the part in the fate of Gollum. So that's something that you really start to get a sense of here. You also get the really important line of, Frodo saying, why didn't Bilbo stab Gollum when he had the chance? Like that would have solved so many things. Gollum would never have escaped. He wouldn't have gone to Sauron. Sauron wouldn't be half as aware of the presence of the ring in the world. He wouldn't know about the location of the Shire or the name of Baggins. Like, there's all of this stuff that because Gollum escaped and Bilbo let him live, that all of this stuff's gone wrong. And Gandalf's like, and so he's like, why didn't Bilbo stab him when he had the chance? He's such a vile creature anyway. He's like an orc. And Gandalf's like, pity. What a pity he didn't stab him when he had the chance. And Gandalf's like, pity. Pity was what stayed Bilbo's hand. It's not a pity that he didn't stab him. It's pity that stopped him from stabbing him, And he says the really key line. And now I'm not actually even on the page. Bear with me. Here. Pity. It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy. Not to strike without need. And he was well rewarded. And this is the really big takeaway here. He was well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. And this is just a really incredible thing to say, firstly. But you really get a sense that the ring doesn't just corrupt you. It doesn't just turn you from a power of good, or something that is just good, into something that you weren't. Like, it doesn't just go from, oh, this was me before the ring, and now this is me after, and it's turned me into something that I never was, I'm not. No, the ring works on parts of you. Like, it takes a part of you and corrupts that and blows it up. It's idolatry. Like, it's you even see with Gandalf in this chapter, it's like, well, a part of Gandalf is his love of the weak, and his desire to help them, and his desire for strength to do good and bring about good in the world. So the ring itself finds that part, he says, and it would twist it, it would warp it. And he's saying here that so Gollum, Gollum wasn't entirely evil when he was Smeagol, but once he saw the ring, once the ring had power on him, it took those parts of Gollum, and exacerbated them, blew them up, and that's why it's really important here that Bilbo started his ownership of the ring with pity. If he had stabbed Gollum and taken the ring, we would have seen an entirely, like, it's probably already over, like the story wouldn't go half the same way. Bilbo would have just turned into another Gollum. He might have been captured by orcs. He wasn't half as cunning or witty as Gollum was, so he probably wouldn't have been quite or nearly aware of the danger that the ring possessed, and Sauron and whatever. It probably would have all been over at that point, because Bilbo started the ownership of the ring with pity. It allowed it to have so little effect on him, and it had to really slowly work up. Obviously, it did start to affect him, but he was able to have it for about like a 60-year period past that point with Gollum. And in the end, in the big picture, it had very, very little effect on him. He was able, and as Gandalf says, Bilbo, to his knowledge, is the only person in history to have willingly given away a great ring, let alone the Ring of Power, which Sauron himself forged. And that is an incredible feat. He says, he needed all my help too. He needed all of Gandalf's help. But that's a really big theme. And I think the ring, just a really quick, I know we're almost at 30 minutes, but that's all right. I don't care if anyone listens to this. The ring itself, as a thing, I think really helps highlight what sin is. You may or may not be a Christian. You may or may not have a biblical understanding of sin, but I think that's an idolatry. And as I said, like those parts of us, like we're not all either good or like black or white. And I think that's something that a lot of people misunderstand about Tolkien. They're like, oh, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and all of these, they're kind of just stupid. They're just kind of, they follow a dualism, which is frankly untrue. They say it's just black and white. It's either good or evil. It's like the goodies against the baddies. That's so not true. You see such a nuance and a complexity of characters that are really, really struggling with inner motives and desires. You see it very obviously in characters like Gollum, who are constantly flitting between the sinful nature and the Gandalf describes it as a chink of light in his soul. You constantly see that. That's Gollum's very obvious. Boromir, he desires the ring, and ultimately, in a way, it's kind of his undoing. With not too many spoilers, but he wants the ring to defend Gondor. That's a noble thing, but obviously through that it's idolatrous. He doesn't act himself, and he doesn't do well, and he becomes in that moment quite a black character, in a sense, to use the language that those critics have of it. He is black in that sense. I'm not racially, sorry, like as in like not evil. He's a baddie kinda, but then he flips back, you know, it's like always, and Denethor as well, and Galadriel when she's tempted by the ring, you know, and it's just Gandalf, like everyone, Frodo in the end, actually I can't really spoil it, but so it's not that at all. Tolkien is not black and white, it's not either good or evil, it does an incredible job, subtly, you know, not in your face, not allegorically, not preachily, he is able to bring about these themes of, you know, temptation and lustful desire and idolatry and sinful nature, and grappling with it's really powerful. And yeah, anyway, so sorry. Really, I didn't actually end up talking a ton about the chapter itself, which is funny. I just kind of started talking about more broad or kind of ambiguous topics, but really this chapter is, I think, something that I could just go and read. Like, if I didn't have time to read Lord of the Rings, which is never an excuse, because you always have time to read Lord of the Rings. You just kind of never stop reading it. But, like, I could almost just go and read this chapter by itself and still just pick it out and still just get so much from it and just get a lot of juice. So anyway, that's breakdown for chapter 2. That went on for literally double the time that I said it would, but I think we talked about a lot. Root words and language, like that's probably just going to be a theme. We're just going to talk about that now, but specifically about Gandalf, about the name Baggins and the name Frodo, and how that kind of helped outline the plot for Tolkien, and then we talked about parts of the chapter. So yeah, that was good. Bye.